You're tuned in to RX Radio.
We're back. I missed you,
Baby.
man.
Holy. You know what?
Anyway.
I think I'm going to adopt the permanent standing podcast desk.
Reason.
Feel a little bit more animated. I feel more about it. I feel a little bit more hostile.
I like that.
You know what? Yeah, because I think we'd talked just before the podcast started. And I think one of the reasons I like it is because we're going through the podcast ratings. And it's like, I don't know, man. I'm not a huge on the rate. Like, we've been doing this for seven years?
No, more.
8?
Podcasts? 9?
Podcasts.
9
fucking years, dog. Okay,
Yeah.
so we've been doing this for a minute. And let's just call a spade, right? Let's just lay it all on the table. This is how this works, okay? This is podcasting, e-commerce, Instagram, social media 101. Podcasts are clip farms, right?
Yeah.
So when we look at a sales cycle, marketing funnel, Instagram is the big mouth, right? That's where everyone's swimming around in there. People creating content, right? Here's how you do this type of row, that type of row. Here's a hot take, right? Everyone's got to have a hot take. I swear to God, you talk to people in the gym and they just think in content. They literally just think in what 180 characters or less, or however much fucking. So, yeah, you're gambling, you're investing, you're the podcast. You ramble for a bit with your friends, and you hope that Jay Marsh finds a clip of you saying something half interesting, and that gets pushed and clipped and captioned and puts on Instagram. Problem. The bad shit gets way more play. And so any of the bad shit, I don't mean us. Our industry loves to feel smart by sharing dumb people's opinions. And then by proxy being like, well, listen to my hot take. Now, the problem is the dumb people have taken over. And a large part as to why is based off of the problem that got me so hostile and has me now adopting the permanent standing studio desk. If you want to do yourself a favor, or, depending on how you look at it, go to Spotify or Apple, whatever your preferred podcast provider is, and go to the top charts in health and fitness. I'm doing it right now. You vote with your subscribe. So we've ebbed and flowed into this ask of our audience over the years. It's probably been, honestly, the last time I remember doing this concertedly, we were sitting in your office in Santa Clara.
Yeah. I was just looking at some of our reviews on Apple, and some of them say the word thick, which was provoked by the pot, thick with lots of C's.
Right, CCs.
And then there's some about like neon gym wear, which is also provoked in like that, maybe like it couldn't have been any later than 2018.
Oh yeah, that would have been within the first 50 episodes for sure.
Yeah.
We said stuff back then that I don't think we would say now because we have something to lose.
Before they started canceling people on the internet.
Right. Yeah. People got me too, and then me and you got real quiet real quick. You were just like, what was that? Nothing? No, nothing at all.
Yeah.
So I'm on the top health and fitness podcast.
Okay.
All right. So we're on Apple. We're nowhere to be found, which is like, you know what? And I'm going to tell you something. Boomers listen to podcasts on Apple. Agreed? Hot take?
Yeah, for sure. It's
right?
Spotify.
All right.
Maybe
Spotify.
YouTube now.
So let me check where we're at on Spotify. I don't know if I can go. I may have to check on my phone.
All right.
We are nowhere in the top 200. Now, we used to back in the day. I think I've seen us rank top 50 at one point.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we were up there.
And let me tell you something. Now, understand the sample bias, right? We're a little bit of science on it, a little bit of statistics. Understand the sample bias of who listens to podcasts on Apple. Boomers. And it is widely reflected. And dude, I'm scrolling. I just see receding hairlines and bad mustaches. And it's just a nightmare of like sleep podcasts and shit about menopause. Like, what is happening? Why did we work so hard to get out of our parents' house to only have the athletes or the old folks just take over. Got to take it back.
Apple Podcast is now Facebook. Is that the right analogy?
That is the right analogy. Yes. If you're posting your political views on Facebook, you're also getting your health information on Apple Podcasts. So look, if you're on Apple and you want to throw us a subscribe, do it. Right. It's like, have you ever seen the movie Money Monster? I think that's what it's called. George Clooney plays one of these like finance show hosts that talks about like market fluctuations and investing and all this. And they're very like eccentric, over the top, highly animated. There's actually a real show. I forget who for the host is. Thank Dave Ramsey for cooking. Wait, Dave Ramsey? No, I'm thinking Gordon Ramsay.
I think that's his name, the finance guy.
Oh, I don't know. I don't have any money, so you let me know. But anyways, he plays this host, and he's like charismatic and likable, and he's kind of like a behind the scenes, a woe is me guy. You know, he's been divorced 17 times and all this shit. Anyways, he gives out a take about a particular stock, and it goes haywire. It goes completely backwards to what he thought was going to happen. And some guy who was down on his luck had listened to his advice and invested the last of his life savings in this thing, and it all went to shit. And this guy, being, you know, at the end of his tether, blamed this host for his stroke of bad luck. So he fucking straps himself to a suicide vest and holds this guy hostage. It's great. If you're not doing anything tonight and you're trying to chill, watch a movie, I think it's called Money Monster. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. And it's George Clooney and Julia Roberts, because of course, I don't think they've done a movie without each other ever. And this fucking guy holds him hostage. And then while he's getting held hostage, George Clooney goes, okay, so you have your money invested in this company. And the guy's like, yeah. And the company went to shit. Yeah. Okay. And this is like being simulcast across the world live. But he's like, if he can get everyone listening or watching to invest in the company, the stock price should rise, and this guy could recoup his costs and maybe make some money. So that's what everyone starts doing. Everyone who's watching this guy get held up by this dude with a dead man switch starts like investing in this company, and it like ebbs and flows and it comes up. It's a good movie. Watch it. So this is kind of what we're doing is like, okay, for the next however long it takes, because look, and I don't want to be too disparaging because I have a lot of respect for Mike Boyle, right? He's OG strength coach. He's one of the first professional strength coaches in North America. But there was a clip that went around, and it was disseminated by, you know, good, smart, well-intentioned young coaches who, you know, either don't understand how it works or are looking for content in a really lazy way. And the clip was, you know, Mike was talking about squatting, and he was comparing it to jamming your fingers in a car door, which is like obviously not a good take. This is the equivalent of at Thanksgiving when your grandma comes over and calls the neighbor's kid Oriental. Like, you can't say that anymore, right? Like, it's out the game, bro. Like, you just can't do it. Bad take. But it stirs up. Right. But it's like, look, do you know why that clip was disseminated? Because it was on Peter Attia's show. And he was with Jeff Cavalier and Dr. G. Shout out to Dr. G, friend of the show. She just sat there. She's not implicated. But it was with Jeff Cavalier, Athlete Next, who's put out some pretty questionable shit over the course of his career. And it was with Peter Attia, who, you know, I don't think would know any principles of health and fitness if it was standing there staring him in the face, respectfully, or not, whatever. But it's like, the reason that goes viral is because when I scroll to the top of this list, the boomers, when they're done posting their political opinions, look, I think Peter Attia has great guests on. I think when he tries to tackle issues that he himself doesn't have enough expertise in, he lets bullshit slide. And I think it's a problem with people who try to have an expansive audience. You can't know enough about everything to be hypercritical of everyone, right? So I think you end up creating an echo chamber of your own beliefs based off of the guests that you have in, which is like, you know, I'm sympathetic to that plight. We try to keep a pretty narrow scope of our guests, and we try and offer pushback because it's a domain of expertise that you and I excel at professionally. But it went viral because I'm looking on the top shows of health and fitness. the youngest person in the top 5 is 40 something years old. That's a problem, right? Right. And we're not far off, but it's like, we got some real miles on us here. Like,
That's
and if that podcast is number 4 on Apple. So all of this is a roundabout way of saying that, look, if you're listening right now, imagine that boomers have the dead man switch and they're trying to blow up me and Jay. All we need you to do is go to Spotify or YouTube, or if you're on Apple Fitness or you're on Apple Podcasts, go to whatever platform it is and just hit subscribe. I would like to, on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, check in and see the stock of the show start to rise, because I just can't deal with the smart coaches that listen to our show also reshare the dumb shit from the number 4 ranked health and fitness podcast in the world. Only until we're number 4 is that going to be acceptable. So hit subscribe, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, because I just can't anymore. Like, I'm looking at this and it's fucking embarrassing. It's embarrassing. Half of these people have like criminal records and like not for cool shit, right? Half of these, I'm looking at one guy right here. I have his fucking mugshot. I have Gary Brecka's mugshot on my computer to send to people who message me about him. It's like, hey, this guy got like done up for like racketeering and shit. Like, he's the Grant Cardone of fucking fitness. Why are we listening to this guy? Yeah. Right? We're listening to him because people subscribe. Because someone at a company goes, oh, hey, how many subscribers does this guy have? Oh, a bajillion. Oh, okay, yeah, I guess we'll bring him in because people subscribe to his show. It's like, okay, people listen to our show, but they don't subscribe. So long roundabout way, subscribe to the show. Goal of June. Let's call it here. June 2027, which is what? 8?
6, 7,
8 months?
8. Yeah.
8 months?
8 months.
Top 50?
All right. I like that.
Doable?
We're asking you guys. We can't do it without you. So
all right.
That's it. That's the goal. You're in on this. So share it with your parents. Hit subscribe on their phone.
Right.
On their
That's
Apple.
who's doing it.
Yeah. I
Parents. know. Yeah. All right. So maybe let's try to do it this way. Today we're going to talk about breathing and bracing.
Yeah.
And we're going to try and make it boomer friendly.
How do we
think we can do it? Boomer friendly, not boomer exclusive.
All right. I'll take it. I accept this challenge.
Couple of Marlboro references in there. Can't be that hard.
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like you're an old soul. You can speak to them.
I'll take that as a compliment. All right. We'll see what we can do. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So breathing and bracing.
Breathing and bracing.
Yeah. I had an interesting conversation with someone the other day, and it's actually like it's replayed in my head over and over again. And we were talking about I don't remember who it was. We were talking about foot pressure, and there was this. Again, it was a fallacy. It was a logical fallacy that they were using to prove a point. And I think they were actually citing Ed Cohn, which Ed Cohn, friend of the show, one of the strongest dudes ever. And he said, well, Ed never really talked about foot pressure because like, well, if it's heavy enough, you have foot pressure. And I thought, what a low fidelity way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's like, explain a hip shift. Explain to me what happens at the foot with a hip shift. It's like, yeah, I've seen a lot of people with heavy ass weights on their back, me, you, everyone I've ever competed with, not have whole foot pressure, right? So, oh yeah, no, you know what it was? I was talking with Sebastian Oreb about this, and like Bass, very strong, right? And the squat much stronger than me. And we were talking about it, and he's like, oh, I never thought of it that way. I never really considered foot pressure. And I was like, yeah, he's like, Ed just always said if you had enough weight on your back, you'd have foot pressure. And I'm like, huh? Like, and I feel like that's a similar conflation to breathing and bracing, right? Where it's like you're breathing, you're probably bracing. You're lifting, you probably have foot pressure, right? It's like you're missing the texture where all of the details are. Like you're missing the thing that matters. Like it's too low resolution to actually see the problems that we're trying to solve. So I think that's the first place I like to start when explaining breathing and bracing is understanding that these two things are not the same thing.
Yeah. And that's honestly, when I teach people, that's one of the first things that I teach them. Because the thing that I notice with people that are less experienced with lifting, so like more novice lifters, or maybe some boomers that are getting in the gym after a long time of not doing it, maybe they had an injury, there's this tendency to not differentiate the musculature that they should be using in a given situation or a given movement, and they'll just over recruit, right? It's less specific, it's more all encompassing, right? As people just kind of clench everything when really they could relax here, and like they don't need their upper traps on, they need their lower traps on, but they're just creating tension in a way that, I don't know, maybe is more intuitive to them, or it makes sense to them, or they just don't know what to do and this is what they think they should be doing. So that's one of the first things that I'll do, because I think of breathing and bracing they can be simple. It's not very complex, but it's very foundational. If you're not breathing and bracing correctly, you're not going to be able to build on that foundation to add layers of complexity, right? So this is buy-in to do anything athletic, right? So you need to understand how to control essentially your lumbar spine, your rib cage, and your pelvis, which is bracing. And then the differentiation is now we need to understand how to integrate breathing with that, right? Can we maintain a muscular brace while still being relaxed through the diaphragm and allow you to not pass out when you're doing whatever it is that you're doing? And depending on the type of brace it is, the type of activity that it is, there's going to be kind of a dial on each of these. Sometimes it needs to be more muscular and less breathing. Sometimes it needs to be full muscular, full breathing, and sometimes it's going to be less muscular, more breathing. Like understanding the proportions in which you can create abdominal rigidity as we transfer forces through the trunk, through the torso. And I think that's kind of the underlying concept here is like, first we need to understand that these are two separate things. Breathing and bracing are two separate things. We'll need them to different degrees depending on the activity or kind of the task at hand. And then from there, we need to understand how to do these in the capacity that we need to do.
So I think you teased out two really important things that I want to highlight for people. Bracing is a byproduct of two components. It's a byproduct of the muscular and it's a byproduct of the respiratory, right? So there's a respiratory brace, which is kind of what you talked about towards the end about the actual pressure in a enclosed system, right? So when people talk about belly breathing, which is a boomer topic that we need to cover, they're talking about this idea of pressure within the abdominal cavity. I would say that the best way to look at pressure is not necessarily in the abdominal cavity, but in the thorax at large, right? So when we think of the respiratory side of the brace, because the brace is a culmination of these two things, right? So there is the pressure component within the thorax, which I would say everything from the fucking apex of your lungs down to your pelvic diaphragm. And I'll explain why we use that language specifically here shortly, rather than just your diaphragm down to your pelvic diaphragm, right? So rather than just thoracic diaphragm to pelvic diaphragm, I think it's best to think about the apex of the lungs, which for those of you watching on YouTube, subscribe and then, just watch me do this with my hands. Apex of the lungs are going to be here, right? Kind of right near the collarbone or the clavicle. So I'm thinking from the apex of my lungs down to the pelvic diaphragm, or what some people would refer to as the pelvic floor. This is the closed pressure system that I'm worried about. Right? It's not just from the diaphragm down, because now you end up with this stomach-centric viewpoint on respiratory bracing, and it kind of leads you astray. So we have the respiratory component. Air in a closed pressure system is very powerful, right? Like, a pneumatic car jack, right? Pneumatic is the study in science of compressed air or gases. And then, hydraulics would be the fluid equivalent of that. So we have this pneumatic system that works alongside our mechanical ventilation and our gas exchange of what we call respiration. And then we have a muscular component, right? And you did a really good job of going, okay, we have this like this air piece and we have this muscle piece. And depending on the task, we're going to draw from these pieces to build a brace that's suitable for the thing we're doing. Right? That's such a key component, or that's such a key concept to be able to break down into its component parts, where it's like, okay, everything has a task orientation to it, right? Because I think one of the things, if we're trying to meet people where they're at, and we'll include boomers into this, is okay, one, breathing isn't bracing. Hopefully we got that squared. Okay, what is bracing? It's a culmination of the pressure that we can create, manipulate, use to our advantage to dynamically stabilize our spine through movement between pressure caused by air and ventilation or respiration, and the containing power of the external musculature that surrounds the rib cage and pelvis, right? So those are like the two components. And then it's like, okay, we have that done. Now, it's not, because this is the next thing bracing is not, it's not the stacked position. It's not, right? You watch, and I've seen it, you've seen it, like when you work in clinical practice as a chiropractor, you get a lot of people that come to you with low back issues. And, unfortunately, fortunately, depends on how you look at it. A lot of our colleagues, especially the more of the boomer persuasion, like the ones that are listening to podcasts on fucking Apple and voicing their opinion on Facebook, like they are telling and teaching people how to be in this stacked position. So like everything is square. Everything, you're never doing anything where your spine moves, right? There's a pretty prominent spinal researcher who will go on these same podcasts. I can guarantee you without fail that the person who espouses this type of very rigid spine behavior has been on, I'm looking at the top 20, has probably been on 10 of the top 20 health and fitness podcasts on Apple.
That's wild.
And it is wild because people didn't subscribe to the show, right? That's why that message gets out. Now, maybe we don't want that because people still come into our clinical practice because they think that breathing isn't bracing. Yeah, I got it. Well, yeah, guess what? It's not what else you think it is, because what's left in your stupid old boomer head is that you think bracing is the stacked position. And that's also wrong, right? So I think that's sort of like the next layer I'd like to unpack is like the task specificity of bracing. Because it is it's like a slider. It's like a switch. Like, okay, we know that regardless of the task we're doing, we have two tools at our advantage to begin to brace the spine. And those tools are the respiratory or the ventilation component of the air in the closed pressure system. And then the second tool is the external musculature. So breaking people of that mold, because how many people, spinal flexion is the one that gets demonized. Hinging, deadlifting. I think this was another one of the boomer hot take machines that had been sort of spreading the airways lately, is like, don't flex. Did you see this one going around? Do you want to PR your deadlift, or do you want to play with your grandkids? Because you can't do both. End quote. Did you hear that?
No.
Now, I would call it medical negligence if the person had a clinical designation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You can give medical advice on the internet, and there's no repercussion now.
Do you want to have a first pass at that statement? Like, I got to compose myself. I'm standing. I'm already hot.
Yeah.
Like,
we'll let you compose yourself, but
thank you.
There's a demonizing of certain movements in this kind of boomer culture. Like squats are bad for your back, bad for your knees. Like you'll hurt your back if you deadlift, if you train heavy. But the big asterisk by this is that if you're doing these things appropriately and you're loading musculature and not structure, then the way that muscle adapts when it encounters greater load over time is that it adapts to be able to deal with greater load over time. And we call that strength training, right? And the difference between the way that muscle and structures adapt is that the way that structural components, whether that's bones, joints, ligaments, cartilage, sometimes tendons, if we're loading them in a way that is stressing them, that in a way that's inconsistent with joint mechanics, the way they're going to adapt is through inflammation. And inflammation over a long period of time under repetitive stress is going to be a signal for your body to lay down more calcium and more bone to stabilize this area. Because the way that we adapt through muscle and the way that we adapt through bone it's completely different. And when we start to adapt through bones and joints through inflammation and calcium deposit, that's called degenerative arthritis. And that can cause issues because it perpetuates that cycle. It makes it harder to move. There's more inflammation, and it is kind of a cascading event that positively reinforces itself. Now, the differentiation between loading musculature and loading structure in this specific case is how you're moving, your strategy to do a deadlift, right? And if you're doing a deadlift in a way where you are, yes, it's axial load regardless of how you do it. But if you're dispersing the load through musculature appropriately, and this is how it comes back to core bracing, is that core bracing, as I define it, a lot of times it is task specific, but the only structure we have between the bottom of our rib cage and the top of our pelvis is our lumbar spine, right? We have bones in the back, and yes, we have fascia and we have connective tissue in the front, but in the front, there's predominantly musculature. And that's going to be our strategy to disperse force through the front of the body, through that space between the rib cage and the pelvis. So if we're relying purely on the structure in the back of our body, then we're overloading structure as we go through hinging movements. But the idea of a brace is to create a strategy to disperse force circumferentially around the abdomen so that we're not overloading the spine itself in something like a hinge movement or in any movement where there is axial load. Now, if we're just demonizing a deadlift, look at what a deadlift is outside of the context of the gym, outside of a barbell. It's picking up your socks, it's picking up your shoes, it's getting the grocery bag off the ground. It's understanding mechanics that you can do for a long period of time because you have a strategy to load musculature and not just structure to be able to push your hips back and lower your center of mass with your hands closer to the ground. So deterring people from doing a movement like a deadlift and also like picking up your grandkids is essentially the same exact thing. I think that's a really dangerous lesson to preach because now you're using fear to talk someone out of doing something that could be much more beneficial for their health than there is a negative effect to that.
I just think, like there's the relative risk is what's lost here. And there's a couple things to highlight. One, there's a technical component to lifting weights that supersedes exercise selection. Let's start there, right? And so we have two pretty egregious offenses of boomers overstepping their rank and frankly their scope of practice. We have the equivocation of a squat, jamming your fingers into a back door. There you go. That's how about jam it up your back door? Jamming it into a car door and fucking up your back or your knees. And then you have within weeks of each other, I think this latter one was previous, that you have an option between PRing your deadlift now or picking up your grandkids later, which I actually don't know which is a worse take. But let's linger. We've kind of touched on the squat one a little bit, so let's linger on the deadlift. When I lived in Dubai, I lived on Sheikh Zayed Road. And if everyone's been to Dubai, Sheikh Zayed Road is like the road of the future. It's fucking, I don't know. You could land a 380 down it. It's fucking massive. It's a football field wide, at least. And it's an interesting structure because there's 4, 5, 6 lanes on either side. So call it 12 lanes across. But the side streets, it's not like a normal road where you get to red light. Everything's a roundabout. So you go off a roundabout and you shoot off into like a 2 or 3 lane side road. And that's how you sort of get to buildings. But Sheikh Zayed Road is like this fucking, it's wild. I don't know if anyone's ever driven in the Middle East. Like, I don't know why Asian people let themselves be stereotyped as bad drivers when you got nothing short of Mario Kart going on with drivers in the Middle East. Like, and I've been all over the Middle East. I can tell you, like Emiratis, Lebs, like these people behind the wheel are fucking insane. I mean, you're in New York City right now.
Yeah.
Go get in a cab and watch what happens when a Lebanese dude picks you up, right? It's fucking gone in 60 seconds, right? In a fucking Corsica. Like, it's insane. There was a guy that I would watch every single day when I go to the gym. He was like a delivery guy for Talabat. That's Talabat, not Taliban. Talabat. Careful. Talabat, which is like, Uber Eats or Instacart or whatever. And this guy used to deliver on like a motorized scooter, like a Razor scooter with a motor on it. And I would watch this guy take the on-ramp into Al-Wal, like onto Sheikh Zayed Road on this scooter. And I'm like, dude is playing a Russian roulette with his fucking life right now, bringing someone their toothpaste or whatever the fuck. And he would just, hair in the wind, COVID mask on. And I'm like, my guy, you are missing the relative risk here, right? Like, COVID is going to get whatever the number is, 1 in whatever. The likelihood that you end up as part of this fucking pavement, ripping a scooter down Sheikh Zayed Road in the middle of the afternoon is like, you don't understand relative risk. I introduced that analogy only to highlight, look, you and I have both trained clients of all walks of life, all ages, different abilities, body compositions, whatever. The number of times I've had to have conversations with clients about really depositing into the strength bank account when you can. Get it while the going's good, right? S&P's up, trading, say you're at 20% on the year. If you're young, and you're the youngest you're ever going to be, which means you are the most capable to get big and strong that you're ever going to be, unless you're like 8. And like, if you're past the age of 18, you are the most capable you are ever going to be right this second you're listening to this podcast. One of my favorite movies of all time is Shawshank Redemption. And one of the quotes in it is, get busy living or get busy dying. If you take this fear-mongering elderly boomer, I listen to podcasts on Apple take of, do you want to PR your deadlift or do you want to, do you want to lift your grandkids? You're setting a timer. You're setting a timer on your robustness of your health, your strength. Because if you do not maximize your ability, and look, it's easy to find a use case. It's easy to look at Ronnie Coleman and God bless him. It's easy to look at Ronnie Coleman and be like, well, you see, it's like, look, don't make law from bad cases. Most of you couldn't be that great if you tried. Most people are pretty mediocre. So you have right now the greatest opportunity in front of you to maximize your ability to get strong and big for the rest of your life, right? And if you heed these warnings, you're going to fuck your back up lifting up your grandkid, right? That's like just do the basic math. Like it's just this reduction down to the lowest common denominator. If you can't deadlift 135 now and your max deadlift peters away to nothing, not to mention the learning component to lifting, take all the strength aside. Learning how to engage your hips, putting your skeleton in the proper position to use the muscle that you do have to engage and stabilize your spine. Like there's so much more. And it kills me to listen to old people treat everyone like they lift like fucking high school kids, right? If there was a demographic that should be preaching the benefits of lifting outside of the muscular adaptations and more in the realm of the cognitive and the skill development, it should be old people. Old people should be, and it's me and you that have to bang this fucking drum and go, no. Exercise is a skill that you learn instead of training, you're teaching. Instead of lifting, you're learning. It's 2 fucking kids in their mid-30s that got to be like, hey, old folks, shut the fuck up, right? You're coming at this the wrong way. And it kills me because the brace is not, and I think even calling it the brace may be a little bit misleading for some, right? Like bracing, because it's dynamic, it's fluid, it's task dependent. is not a static thing. It's not a thing that you learn. It's you learn how to do it with all of the skills that you learn, right? Like when you wrestled, for example, I think wrestling is a good proxy for this. Like when you're learning throws, is that a fair? Am I using okay? Like that's a judo thing more so, but
No.
that's there.
Yeah, I wrestled freestyle and Greco, and we'd go through practices, man. They would just get out the crash pad, and you step up and you get thrown, and you have to compose yourself and stand there and throw someone else. And then you go back in line and you go through.
So I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who's a kickboxer and like pretty dangerous dude. And he said one of the things when you're learning kickboxing and like getting access to some of these ranges is trusting to put your body in these positions, right? Like understanding the counterbalance is like, look, if I got to get my foot over your head, my head needs to be down here. So I need to actually practice throwing my head down to this position, because if I don't have that balance on my center of mass or my center of mass balance on my base of support, my leg can't go that high without me falling over. So I actually need to trust to learn to get my head in this position, right? And like that's like a skill that you have to learn. And so you could sit there and you could go and you could kick you could kick a crowd, kick a dummy, a bag, a person, whatever. But it's like you're not going to get better until you learn the fundamentals of that skill. And with lifting, it's no different, right? Like there's small details that open up these big doors if you treat it like learning. And so when someone gets on there and in front of tens of millions, hundreds of millions cumulative people, and goes like, oh yeah, squatting is like jamming your fingers in a car door, or you have the option of PRing your deadlift or or lifting your grandkids, you're just like, how can anyone in good conscience fucking sit back and say that? It blows my mind.
Yeah, I mean that's just irresponsible in my opinion. But you said it earlier. That is what is perpetuated on the internet, right? You have to say something with shock value, or no one's going to listen. If you said squats get your legs stronger, deadlifts will get your hamstrings and glutes and lats stronger, no one's going to give a fuck because everyone knows that. It's just a sensationalization of this information, and then these people agreeing with it and validating it. That's what the internet likes to hear, and the internet likes to react to it. But I mean, to your point,
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, you're good.
To your point, and back to kind of the original point about bracing, is that no matter what you do on a day-to-day basis, you're using your core, right? You're using the core musculature, and you're either using it in a way that is consistent with continuing to use your core for a long period of time, or you're using it in a way that is inconsistent with being able to use your core and transfer forces from upper body to lower body. And that's realistically how I define core bracing, right? In its simplest form, it's allowing you to transfer forces from your upper body to your lower body to your upper body in a way that is sustainable and will protect your structure from injury over time. That is probably the most fundamental thing to, we'll speak to the boomers here and say longevity, that I can think of, right? Is understanding how to use your musculature in a way that allows you to not hurt yourself as you do very mundane things. And the best way to do that, and like, there's predictors of like longevity. I think some of them are like lower body strength is a big one. Like stride length is another one. Like to some degree, flexibility. I think like VO2 max is on there. And I'm sure there's other more biological markers. But the key to having and sustaining a certain stride length, or obtaining a level of lower body muscular strength, or I've actually seen lately that research is pointing more towards power than strength, sustaining power later in life. So that's force output quickly, is it actually has a really strong correlation to longevity and like lifespan. The only way you're ever going to build up a capacity to do that is understanding how to use your core to be able to train those adaptations at a point where, like you said, you're ripe to train those adaptations. So understanding how to use your breath and use your core musculature in dynamic ways, that is the key to being healthy for a long period of time, being physically healthy for a long period of time. I don't think there's any way around that.
So I want to dig into some of the more intricacies of how we go about doing this. I want like some takeaways, because I think there's a couple of buckets I want to draw people's attention to in the way that we use our core for this very purpose. The first is the difference between split stance and or unilateral movements. So split stance and unilateral, we oftentimes use the word split stance in lieu of unilateral, right? So unilateral means one leg, right? Now split stance means two legs, but we're favoring load towards one or the other. So we and I've been guilty of this. So split stance doesn't mean unilateral, right? Now lunging could be seen as unilateral, because there is a point in lunging where we actually underload that one leg and we actually completely load the other, right? So that would be a unilateral movement. Pistol squats, unilateral movement. Split squats is a split stance position, right? Not necessarily a unilateral. It's kind of halfway there, but it's not fully there. We don't fully unload that other leg. So split stance position or unilateral, that's one bucket. And then bilateral movements, because the scales tip between respiratory and muscular, depending on that is a major dividing line in the way we look at it. So let's look at the split stance movements first. So this would be, let's just take a regular split squat, right? Both feet on the ground, nothing crazy. And you can implement any variable, rear foot elevated, front foot elevated, rear foot elevated and front foot elevated, like whatever. Both feet are on the ground or an apparatus, and they're both sort of like locked in place. The very constraint of being in a split stance, and it is a constraint because it is a constraint to overall load, because you are less stable by the physics of the movement, means that the decreased amount of load means, and you said something really, really kind of profound out of the gate, is like when most people brace, they just tighten everything. And it's like, well, that's really inefficient, right? Because you're flexing your orbicularis oculi, the muscle in your eyeball. It's like, don't we waste the money on that? Right? We got a bank account here. We want to spend on where we need it, when we need it, right? So it's like, if I'm loading in a split stance position, like, split squat with dumbbells in my hands, the demand for my brace in general is going to scale directly to the loadability of the position I'm in. So once I'm in split stance or unilateral, I know I'm in a constraint of load that's far greater, which means I'm using less load. The constraint of load is greater, which means the load is less, than if I was in a bilateral stance, right? So if I had my feet next to, let's define bilateral. Bilateral is if I'm squatting or deadlifting primarily, right? Our pelvis is moving up and down in a squat, feet are next to one another, or deadlifting and our hips are moving back to front primarily, right? So the very constraint of like, oh, okay, there's less load, the overall necessity for the brace comes down. Now, bracing is usually meant to oppose shear forces, right? So when we have two types of forces at the spine, we have compressive forces, which are, if something was like sitting at the top of my head right now and pushing down on the top of my skull, which gravity is sort of doing, that'd be compressive. The second I start to bend and hinge over, the orientation of gravity relative to my spine starts to move horizontal, and those vertebrae are now incurring the potential movement, or the vector of that force is so that it's sliding the vertebra from one adjacent vertebra to the next towards the ground. Where we're compressed, we get a lot of structural stability. The end plates of the vertebra are sort of compressing on the discs in between. So we're really trying to brace for peak shear forces. That's when things go wrong. So let's take a squat pattern like a counterbalance squat with your heels elevated. One, not super loadable because you're constrained by how much you can hold in your hand. And two, the bracing strategy has to drop twofold, because we don't really need to brace that much because we know that it's a relatively constrained load, because it's only as much as you can hold out at shoulder height with your arm straight. And two, we also don't need a lot of brace because our spine is completely stacked, more or less. It should be. The whole point of that squat is so your spine stays straight. So you can probably get to the bottom of a counterbalance squat and do a full inhalation and exhalation and require very little on the respiratory brace, because even the passive musculature alone in that position is enough to support the spine under those conditions. The fact that there's not much shear force there to begin with. But if you and I are doing conventional deficit deadlifts, we're probably going to be taking our air at the top of that lift before we go down and grab the bar. Ton of shear force at the spine, right? So we're going to have to factor that in. So now we have bilateral versus split stance and unilateral. Split stance and unilateral are probably going to start to engage a little bit more of the muscular brace, because if you look at the core muscles that are primarily going to offer us an advantage in that position, it's going to be obliques, internal and external, left and right. And then a little bit more superficially, we're going to have lats and glutes, right? So lats and glutes kind of take care of the back. Internal, external obliques, front or left or right are going to take care of the front, right? And so we're gonna have to incur some rotation as we go down into these position of shear forces, because rotation is going to show us that we're utilizing those muscles that actually span from left to right, from front to back, and left to right, right? So we're going to have to utilize that. So if I see someone doing a split squat and their stride is really short, right, and that means their spine is staying upright, it means they have a lot of base of support, as opposed to someone who has a really, really long stride. It's like the longer the stride, the more you're going to want to suggest some rotation, because you're not using your breath a lot, because you're not using a lot of weight. But to use the muscles that you have to support it, understand that those muscles are working through the transverse plane in left side rib cage to right side pelvis, both front and back, from your lats to your glutes on the back, and then your obliques that attach your pelvis to your ribs on the front, or ribs to pelvis, depending if you're talking internal or external obliques. So that's another bucket to get into the habit of like, okay, breathing isn't bracing. Got it. Great. Okay. So when we are bracing, it's accumulation of these two things. It's muscular and it's respiratory. Great. Okay. Unilateral versus bilateral, right? So be able to create this flow chart in your body. Oh, unilateral. Okay. It's a unilateral movement. Probably going to be using less overall net load. Probably going to need less overall net brace. So I don't need to take as big a breath in. And I probably want to engage a little bit more of the musculature through the transverse plane. The longer the stride, the more musculature we're going to want to engage. Bilateral movements, okay, respiratory is in play here. Now, here's the caveat, because I think this is where the conversation usually goes when we're talking about bracing, squatting, and deadlifting, right? When we're talking about the Boyle comment about jamming the fingers in the car door, we're talking about the Stu McGill on Huberman or Tia's or whoever's podcast about do you want to pick up your kids or do you want to PR your deadlift, it really comes down to squatting and deadlifting are ruling the roost. Now, here's the money. One of either is never going to be as much as the right amount of both.
Yeah.
So we have respiratory and muscular, as the two components that make up a brace. One of the things I see with the deadlift and the squat, actually, you know what? I don't know which is a more egregious offender, is that the crowd that thinks breathing is bracing and more breath equals more brace, they breathe themselves out of position.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? They breathe themselves to a position where their muscles are rendered relatively ineffective, and that's where things go wrong, right? Mm-hmm. So what does this look like? Belly breathing. Boomers, get off Facebook Marketplace for 3 seconds and listen to me. You do not have lungs in your stomach. Please, for the sake of all things holy, stop breathing into your stomach. PSA. You stop, because what does that mean? Breathing into your stomach means not even creating an eccentric ab. An eccentric ab means that your pelvis is in a relative posterior orientation and your ribs are sort of eccentrically loading by flaring up. That's okay. We like eccentric ab. Eccentric ab is controlled. Eccentric ab is part of the muscular brace. But when you cue belly breathing, you end up taking this accordion of the pelvis, lumbar spine, and rib cage, and just going. And what does this do? Well, it disadvantages your glutes. Your glute max is going to be severely disadvantaged in the anterior tilt, right? What does that do to your lats? Well, if you start compressing the posterior aspect of your rib cage, your lats are going to have very poor leverage at that lower aspect of the ribs to stabilize your low back, right? So don't trade it all in for a big breath. right? Because you need a much of a breath to contribute to the respiratory component while not sacrificing the position of the skeleton, which puts advantage the other half of the equation, which is the muscular. Right? And that's where I think, like, if we were to kind of bring it full circle and talk about the two conversations that have been really ruling the airwaves this last month, that's it, right? So there's a nuance between, because nothing will move your position like your breath, right? The central orientation of your diaphragm is one of the key components of your lifting posture. And if you decide to go full send, and that diaphragm is contracting and pushing those ribs out, and you're deliberately breathing into your stomach, there's no way you're going to be in a good position to use your muscular brace. So you've traded in, the sum of the parts for less than the whole, like the potential of the whole. So I think that's, like, when I think of flow chart, that's how I usually instruct people, and how to find a logical footing when you're describing the brace to someone. So it's like, I don't know, that's sort of like my 10 cents 80 pesos on the topic, because I think it is so contextual, right? And I think, but dependent on or contextual to these things, like, are you unilateral? Are you bilateral? Do you understand the difference between respiratory component and muscular? When do you have to use each? Well, are you bilateral or unilateral? Unilateral, you probably don't have to use your breath as much. You don't need to use your brace as much. If you want to use your musculature, one of the things that split stance and unilateral offers you is more access to the frontal and transverse plane. So to express that muscular component of the brace, you need to start integrating that and showing that through the movement of the transverse plane. When you get to bilateral, you got to use both, but make sure that none rule the roost, right? You don't want to exhale to the point of not being able to use your diaphragm and having no air in the system. And you don't want to use your air so much that you don't have any positional advantage to your external musculature because you just went all in on the breath.
Beautiful. It's beautiful. And I think, just as you're saying this, I haven't really put it in these words before, but the way I'm thinking of it is, and we've said this many a times on the podcast and in different formats, but an active change or active control of a position is always going to be more impactful than a passive one, right? And I'm not hinting towards the fact that breathing is passive and muscular bracing is active, but muscular bracing is more active and breathing is more passive in the way that we create tension, right? In the way that we hold tension here, because there is an activity to the breathing process, and we're using the muscles of the diaphragm. And
would you say automatic versus voluntary?
To some extent.
Okay. I'm with you.
What I'm getting at here is that in terms of priority when it comes to bracing, and you can let me know your thoughts on this, but muscles are going to put you in the position that you need to be in, right? So muscular bracing is kind of priority, and then the respiratory component of it is ancillary to that. And even if I think of this in all contexts, right? In a situation like a bilateral back squat versus a unilateral split squat, right? Unilateral split squat is going to be more of a muscular component to establish and maintain that brace, because it is a bit more dynamic in the way that we're moving, the way that we're creating stability there. It's also underloaded, so it is going to be a longer set. So there will be a full inhale and exhale at some point throughout that set, versus the repetition of a back squat where we're unracking, we're getting our muscular brace, we're enhancing that with our breath, and then we're doing a rep, and we'll probably let go of that at the top where we're in a very axial loaded, very structurally stable position, then reestablish before we go for the next rep. So kind of what I'm getting at here is that not necessarily in priority of importance, but priority in terms of the order of operations here, muscles are going to have to put you into the position, right? Breath is never going to put you in the position. But once we use our musculature to put us in that position, the breath is going to either be an advantage or a disadvantage, depending on how we use it, right? Because that's going to be essentially, when we're talking about bracing, we're more so talking about what happens from, the lumbar spine attachment to the rib cage, or like We could talk about the shoulder and the hip and how that integrates as well, but that's kind of what we're talking about here. We don't have the same capacity to move our rib cage as we do our kind of abdomen or our lumbar region, right? So we have to use the musculature to create the position or the orientation from rib cage to abdomen to pelvis. And then what we're doing then is we're filling the gaps with the air, right? Is we're using that air to create pressure to stabilize the areas that we don't necessarily have the same degree of control actively over. And that's not 100% true. That, like, don't clip that and have Peter Attia rip into me. But the idea here is where if I don't create the positions with my muscles first, my breath isn't going to get me there, right? If I breathe myself into a certain position, then my muscles can hold me there, but we're not going to ever create necessarily the best positioning or the most stable positioning through our musculature just through breath alone.
I want to steel man that and mitigate any potential criticism of what you said, because I 100% agree. So here's where I think we're coming at this. We're coming at this from a position where people need to inhale to find a better position. Someone out there is going to say, yeah, but if you exhale, you can bring your ribs down. It's like, yeah, but you can also bring your ribs down by using your obliques, right? So I think there's a subtlety, there's a fracture in this conversation between inhalation and exhalation, concentric versus eccentric, and also a difference between forced and passive inhalation and exhalation. The muscles, right? So it's like, and I see the framing you're coming from, and I just wanted, before anyone finishes the comment about, yeah, well, because I know Joe Sullivan, for example, been on the show. Joe's a great guy, super smart lifter, world record holder. Joe's built like a fucking power lifter. Like, ain't no two bones about it. When you don't have to ask the guy. It's like you see a guy like Joe, and it's like meeting a guy like Jeeves. Oh, your name is Jeeves? Oh, so you're a butler. It's like, right, you are, sir. Oh, you meet Joe, you look at him, you go, you're a strength sport athlete, right? Like, he's a fucking brick shithouse. And he uses like a breath built, and he finds the position. He'll say this, and I was thinking of him while we were talking about this, and I know someone is going to be like, we're kind of throwing shade and dispersion, and I want to fortify our position as we are impervious to shade and dispersion. Because if I'm using a forceful exhale, people will use the breath, but a forceful exhalation is a different autonomic process. It's a less passive process, to kind of use your language, than a normal exhale. Right? You will never be able to, with a normal inhale or exhale, find these positions. Let me tell you, I remember I was at a meet once when, oh shit, who was it? Let me check. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, it was JP Price. One of the most amazing people you ever want to meet in your life. JP Price, one of the best American-born squatters of all time. And I watched JP Price squat over 1,000 pounds.
Oh,
right, bro, just a fucking brutal amount of weight, right? Like an unfathomable amount of weight. And I wanted to steel man your point about your breath, and in this case, we're talking about an inhalation to create abdominal pressure, not an exhalation to create more of a muscular brace, which you can pull yourself into a better position using your muscles, and you don't need the respiratory component to do that. So that's like knock against whoever's already writing the comment. So haha, fuck you, beat you to it. But further to your original point, I remember being in the warm-up room, and JP, I was warming up for deadlifts. I was done squatting. Well, time 1,000 pounds on the bar, I'm long gone. And I'm watching JP warm up, and I'm like, this is fucking phenomenal. Like, this is so cool that I get to like just be back here and watch this guy do his thing. And he goes out and he smokes, I don't know, like 970 or something like that. And I asked him, and I was like, man, how does it feel? I think he squatted 1,000 on his third attempt. And he's like, it's the weirdest thing, over 900, you open your mouth to try and take a breath and you can't. There's so much pressure.
Terrified.
Right. Terry, he goes like, it's like you ever out in the, like you go to Chicago in the winter and it's so windy that you can't breathe. There's just like a stop gap. You're just like, no, I'm not. Your lungs are like, no, we're cool, man. We don't need that much. We'd rather have none. And it's like, not only can your breath not change your position of your skeleton when you're in the context of bracing. It absolutely can when we don't have any load on us. If it can, it's not worthy enough of a brace.
Yeah.
Right? JP is sitting there with 900 going, he's like, dude, you unrack and it's like drinking through a straw, right? It's like breathing through a straw. Like he's out there with fucking 900s back, a little fucking snorkel on, trying to get a breath in, 1,000 pounds. And it's like, so that not only, because again, I want to fortify our position and I also want to color some context to that. Cause like, I think it is something where as your top end strength goes up, your ability to internally brace or to necessitate an internal brace should also go up, right? Like I remember when me and Lundy, shout out Lunderjack Productions, went in, it was the summer between the 9th and the 10th grade. We went in and I did a leg workout with this kid named Graham Skelton, who was like super jacked. And I got pinned under 95 pounds in a squat. Right? Like, dude, what were you squatting? 275 between the 9th and the 10th grade?
Probably close to it.
That's fucking wild, dude. So like, I literally got on a Smith machine, no less. Pinned.
Dang.
90.
Yeah,
So it's not even 95 pounds, like 50 pounds.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, now it's, I fuck. When I was at the peak, I could probably sit at the hole with 455 and take a full breath in because it moves and it should move. So I know that when I'm lifting up anything that's lighter than 455 and I don't have a full breath and brace, I'm chilling. Right. And so you have to, the easiest way to raise the ceiling is you have to raise the basement. Right. So like when people, and it's tricky because in dealing with post injuries, a lot of people will brace doing everything because they're so nervous of the perception of that pain. And they remember the experience of it. You got to break that, right? Like you got to push your muscular brace. And this is where a lot of accessory exercises come in, right? And accessory exercises have so many more benefits than just being the thing that pushes the lift forward. It's really what brings up that basement of function. So your ceiling can be that much higher, right? Like how can I train the obliques or the glutes or the lats or the function of the shoulder, the function of the hip, the position of the pelvis, the abs, the internal obliques, the lats, train them in a way that may not be integrated in the moment, but it's giving them more horsepower that when I stick them to the track and put them in the right position, they can take a lot more load, right? And I think that's something that people get lost in the pursuit of learning how to brace is like, yeah, you got to live your life, dude, right? And I think if your kids get heavy, fine, but if they're 450, like put them on a program. Retatrutide is doing wonderful things for fat kids. Like you should be also thinking about, okay, bracing for peak load, sure, but where's the window where I need to deploy that and bringing up that muscular base to be able to work in times as a backup system, a redundancy system to support the spine on pure musculature. And I think that's something that a lot of people miss as well. So do you want to recap this?
I mean, I think we should. I'm going to let you recap it though.
So, all right. So what do we start? Breathing, and breathing is not bracing.
So, all right. So yes, breathing is not bracing. Both breathing and bracing and muscular bracing are components that are foundational for movement, for preserving structure, and for allowing you to train in a way where you can metaphorically raise that basement and that ceiling of capacity through musculature while doing so in a safe and sustainable way. I think that's an important part of it. It is something that is dynamic. It's not rigid, I think. And that's something we didn't even really get into. But the idea, bracing is dispersing load in a way that allows you to maintain center mass over base of support. Can we accept that? I don't think I've ever said it that way before. But
so run it back. I would say dispersing force.
Dispersing force in a way that allows you to maintain center mass over base of support.
I would say that's true in most things in the gym. Yeah, you don't want I'm thinking of like loading and unloading, like if someone's jumping and all that. But yeah, I would say by
Okay.
and large, yeah, I think
And
that's
and basic support can be dynamic based on position
right,
load.
right.
So with that, there's the rigid form of bracing that we think of, squat, deadlift. Like it's very rigid, and we're trying to not change position. But the dynamic form of bracing is, say I'm in a lunge stance and someone throws me a med ball, right? I'm deviating my center of mass, dispersing that force through the musculature in a way where I'm staying aligned over my base of support so that I can buffer, decelerate, and if I'm going to throw it back, change direction and accelerate, right? I need to have a component of balance around that. So bracing it is dynamic and it is static, but it's neither all the time, right? It's both of these things, and it needs to exist in a system. And this is the part where the boomers need to understand, is that this needs to be something that we dial up or down the demands of that brace based on the activity, the thing that we're doing. So it needs to be trained in that way. And we've done plenty of podcasts in the past on like core training, and this is why both static core training and dynamic core training are important. So that's a bit of an aside, that there was context in there around that, but we didn't explicitly make that point. Um,
Unilateral, bilateral, I think is our next step. But I
yeah.
want to tangent off that because I think there's
So
something that we missed. And you touch on it a little bit when you're like, okay, when we did a core podcast, and I remember the podcast that you were referring to, where we're like, okay, there's dynamic core, there's static core. With dynamic core and static core, there always has to be a consideration of what the appendages are doing, right? Because one of the things we want to talk about athleticism, and it's a nebulous term to define, but if we're looking to build a robust client, right, someone who's anti-fragile, one of the skills that you can learn is how to be rigid in your extremities but mobile in your core,
yes.
right? I think that's something that's massively understated when we talk about core. Like we work, you and I work with professional athletes, right? And the sport we predominantly work in is football. Like when you watch someone stiff arm, when you watch Derrick Henry, who's not a client of ours, but when you watch Derrick Henry punch a guy in the head running 22 miles an hour and his arm just turns into some fucking steel rod, but the rib cage is still so fluid and he's able to be, he's rigid in the arm through the shoulder while being able to be malleable and not rigid through the rib cage, trunk, and core, right? And that's a type of bracing in itself that's also really useful. So to kind of piggyback of like, okay, we have dynamic core and we have, static core. There's also the relationship of how that exercise integrates the appendages, right? Because a plank is static, right? But it's like the arms are static and the trunk is static. And there's a place for it, probably not as often as people use it. People use that exercise often, and it has a distinct purpose to it, but it's pretty low level and it's hard to scale. But when we think about someone like an athlete, it's like a core work can be something that allows us to integrate a rigid extremity, whether it be a leg or an arm, a shoulder, a humerus, a femur, a hip, a scapula, a pelvis, with a dynamic core system that's allowed to be really mobile,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think of like sprinters, like at the elbow, they're relatively relaxed, but the spinal engine is moving like crazy, right? So I think that's another thing that we need to take into consideration, and that's for maybe we call that special athletic population considerations or a further along progression. So we have this like, okay, breathing's not bracing, right? Got it. But breath and muscular create a brace, okay? And this brace can either be static or dynamic and trained as such. And we can do static or dynamic with taking into consideration, well, what is the state of the appendages that this force is being loaded through? Are those static with the core being dynamic? Is it static with the core being static? Is it dynamic with the core being dynamic? And all of those interplay to allow you to predict the amount of force that has to be transferred through that system, right? Which, to your point, allows for longevity. It allows for long-term progression in performance, which is probably the way that you and I look at longevity. It's like we consider longevity, but not to see our 100th birthday, but to make sure we're benching on our 100th birthday, right? So that's how we look at longevity. And I find it now academic pablum to argue about the idea of health span versus lifespan, right? Like I think I'm not even going to acknowledge, I'm not going to expand on that conversation because I find it just academically disinteresting because it's not a hot take, right? It's like, okay, like whatever the fuck ever. I don't care. I'll see you at the bench when I'm 100 years old and everyone else can go fuck their hand. Then we get into the differentiation of unilateral versus bilateral. How does the constraint of load given stance, or to your point about, and actually the more I think about it, I really like that definition of the inclusion of the center of mass and base of support. How does that constraint ultimately decrease the overall loadability of the exercise, bringing down the necessity for the peak brace possible, but also bringing in the likelihood that the muscular brace is going to be more of a driving factor in these unilateral or split stance positions, right? You've popularized the B stance RDL with a landmine, right? That's a you thing, which is so cool. Like I popularized the hip airplane. I'm like, God, this sucks. God, it's so fucking lame, bro. Like, dude, I don't know. I was 290 fucking squatting 700 plus dead. And everyone's like, yo, look at me stand on one leg. Like, you look like a fucking lawn ornament. You look like a pink flamingo, you fuck. Stop sending me those videos.
Fed up you were with people tagging you in hip airplanes.
You know what's funny? Someone tagged me in a kid the other day, and I shout out this guy. I've been following him ever since because at first I thought it was a joke. This kid, Alex Blennis? I don't know. I followed him. But no, this Alex Blennis kid did like a PR, a 3 rep max hip airplane PR with like the kettlebell. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
The kettlebell behind the back. And I'm like, stop fucking. And I tagged him. Like, this is actually pretty impressive. We might actually get him on the podcast. But yeah, all things aside, unilateral and bilateral are going to set different standards for how we slide the scale of brace. How we slide the scale from respiratory component to muscular component. We're going to take that fader and we're going to move it a little bit more to muscular and a little bit out of respiratory. Just think about the central orientation of the diaphragm. If we go full send into this thing that's central, but we're in a rotated position, that diaphragm one is probably not going to be able to get a deep breath in if the pelvis and the ribs are sort of in this contorted, reciprocated position, sort of cross from left to right on either side, anterior to posterior. And if you do, you're probably going to start to coil yourself back to straight. If you understand like the biomechanics of the central tendon of the diaphragm, and when it starts to contract, it's contracting on itself. So when you take a breath in, it's going to start to pull your ribs into a place that's neutral. You don't want that. You actually want, because you're in that split stance or unilateral position, you're going to need the positional bias towards your external musculature that's afforded to you by getting these ribs and pelvis moving in that reciprocal fashion. But bilateral stances, your squats and your deadlifts, your real money makers, this is going to be where we find the true marriage of respiratory and muscular, right? And understand that, okay, now we're in we're in big money territory here. This is the real contentious shit, but this is the color and context and texture that you need to have around these conversations to have them effectively. So you don't make an ass of yourself comparing squatting to a fucking jamming your finger in a car door or making some inane comment about deadlifting and lifting your grandkids in fucking 30, 40 years, right? And the color comes down to, okay, we need to make sure these two are done effectively, but first, is it the right exercise? Have we progressed our relative strength to body weight to a point where we can manage the learning of these skills under any sort of meaningful load that challenges tissue, muscle, soft tissue, or otherwise, right? If we have progressed to this point, no breath or muscular brace will outdo the performance and stability afforded to your spine by the proper utilization of both, right? So making sure that we use our external musculature in accordance with the demands of some of our large muscles to put our pelvis and our rib cage in the right position and use our breath in conjunction with to stabilize the spine against shear or sliding forces of the spine. So as long as you do that, you execute with good technique, you train within a reasonable proximity to technical failure, you train accessory movements that are complementary, or even some ways deliberately variable to the patterns that you're loading, and you take the adequate amount of rest periods between bouts, and you prepare yourself, there's absolutely zero reason why you should not be doing this, and do it now, because it is you today listening to this podcast, and when you share this with your parents and you tell them to subscribe, this is the best opportunity that anyone will have listening to this podcast to build good credit in that strength bank account that you can withdraw from for the rest of your life.
Love it. Nailed it. Yeah.
Let's go, baby.
It's good, man. I like this. I think this is a good take. This is a hot take, and it forced me to verbalize things in a way I haven't yet, even on this podcast, and I like that.
The exclusive. Heard it here first.
Yeah. Share with
I like
your
the
parents.
standing, man. I got to do the standing. The standing's it.
It's good. It's a good energy.
What do we got here? What are we at? Hour 15. All right.
Yeah. That's good.
We're back, baby. All right. So we'll end on this. Subscribe.
Yep. Leave a review.
Leave a review. That'd be cool.
Unless you're on YouTube. It's the worst of the worst on YouTube. Man, some of those
really checked. Have you checked? You've been
every
checking?
now and then I'll check.
I don't feel good about it. I avoid it. I'm actually pretty good at like avoiding where I know the snake pits are.
Yeah.
Like YouTube's not real. You know what? YouTube proves to me the dead internet theory. These are bots. These aren't real people. Like, there's no way.
I'd like to think that. Yeah. If you're listening on YouTube, just fuck off and don't come back. But if you're listening on any other platform.
No, we need YouTube. Like, no, definitely. Leave a nice comment and tell your friends.
That's fair. Yeah.
But yes, Spotify, just I think we wrote subscribe. Yeah. Let's fucking, I want to say it's Money Monster. I'm pretty sure it's Money Monster. Let's Money Monster RX Radio. Money Monster. Yeah, it is Money Monster. Let's Money Monster RX Radio. There you go. Oh, he'll do it.
It's in.
Is that a Marlboro tin?
Yo, yeah, Garrett Porter got this for me.
What does it say?
It says Decky.
Why? Is that the brand?
Yeah, it's so depending on where you put your Zins, that's your upper decker, your lower decker, and the cute way to say it is Decky. So I got some upper deckies in right now. Like, subscribe.
That's it. There you get top that. All right, we'll see you guys. We'll see you guys next week.